In 1863, prior to the end of slavery in 1865, slaves were worth $3 billion. Rather than having any wealth, African American slaves were seen as a powerful asset in the United States economy. Even despite centuries of improvements in terms of racial equality, a racial wealth gap is still prevalent today. In 2020, the median white household had a net worth of $171,000, while black households had a net worth of $17,600. And some of the main contributors to this nearly 10-to-1 wealth gap have been government-approved land and housing policies. After the Civil War ended in 1865, Abraham Lincoln signed a bill that granted freed slaves in the South 40 acres of land. Weeks later, pushback from white Americans and a Confederate supporter assassinating Lincoln led to this bill being overturned, and freed slaves were evicted from their land. This marked the start of a pattern where hope arose for African Americans, then it quickly vanished. Historically, wealth has always compounded in the favor of white Americans, whereas black Americans have faced centuries of inequality with housing policies like redlining. For example, even when President Franklin D. Roosevelt unleashed mortgage credit during the 1933 New Deal, trying to grant upward mobility to black Americans, white Americans quickly thought that African Americans moving into their neighborhoods would bring property values down.
Do you think a Negro family moving here will affect the community as a whole?
I think that, the property values will immediately go down if they are allowed to move in here in any number.
This perception led to government-approved redlining, a system that mapped black neighborhoods in red, degrading those communities. A red zone was denied the right to receive mortgage loans, indicating that FDR's New Deal mortgage loan project wouldn't help the people it was designed to. In the late 20th century, red zones in this new housing system were surrounded by low-quality schools, low-quality hospitals, and more safety hazards than wealthier cities, highlighting how this government-approved redlining meant that even with systems meant to uplift communities that were marginalized for centuries, the government still chose to maintain white superiority. After redlining officially ended in 1968, the ideas behind it still had rippling effects decades later, with one being that black Americans still faced disadvantages like discriminatory lending. In the 1990s, as the government expanded the mortgage market, 1 in 5 black borrowers with good credit were still given subprime loans that became very expensive over time. Of course, these loans were detrimental for families who faced such high interest that they couldn't pay off their mortgages, putting millions of black American families into poverty and contributing to the housing crisis of 2008. Environmental racism, which is a long-lasting result from redlining in the 20th century, occurs today when toxic or environmentally harmful facilities like landfills or waste sites are placed near low-income, marginalized communities. These facilities contain many air pollutants like particulate matter, carbon monoxide, and nitrogen dioxide, which contribute to cancer and other health issues. The problem with environmental racism is that landfills and waste sites take up lots of green space. If you look at this map of redlining in Boston from the 1930s, and then the map showing tree cover in that same area today, where a darker green means more trees and healthier living conditions, you can conclude that there is much more tree cover in the originally blue-lined areas, which were exclusive to white Americans. Clearly, you can see how FDR's project to provide housing to African Americans led to segregation and redlining policies that still made privileges exclusive to white Americans. A century later, the government is still choosing to keep wealthy and already healthy white neighborhoods free from air pollutants, rather than helping the lower income communities of color that face more environmental hazards. Also, poorer cities today occupied by minority groups typically don't experience renovations unless the process of gentrification is occurring, which, as many put it, often leads to gentrified neighborhoods becoming a victim of its own success. Gentrification occurs when poor cities try to attract and then cater to higher class, mostly white newcomers, spurring new developments that cause a spike in rent and property values. Historically, gentrified cities have done two things to its residents. The government-led innovations have hurt small businesses and caused a higher cost of living, creating a cycle of migration for black and brown people. Take San Francisco, for example, a gentrification hotbed that has been experiencing tech boom since the 1990s. In the 1970s, African Americans made up 13.4% of San Francisco's population. But since this tech boom made rents skyrocket, that population has shrunk to 6.1% in 2010. The government has used land and housing policies to keep wealth and a high quality of life in the hands of white Americans, which affects this country's racial landscape in many ways. It perpetuates America's wide racial wealth gap, putting communities of color in a position where they are told through advertisements that they will experience upward mobility, but are instead kept in a cycle of facing environmental hazards, poor school and healthcare systems, and poverty.